going to work. And then we provide the assistance and help, whether it's a university or whether it's a company, down the transition path. I believe that model is why we've been successful. We can point to over 20 either commercially available or open source available products in the last 5 years because of that model.
Now to the early adopter, Steve. What made you take a chance using Voltage, a Stanford University computer science spinout, a white paper when I first met the principal investigator, Professor Dan Bonnet, 7-8 years ago, on building the first end-to-end encryption platform in the payment processing sector? What recommendations and lessons learned do you have for other corporations who are considering collaborative research projects, the ROI, the risk, the trust, the brand, value, time, and investment?
Well, Robert, Heartland had a large problem, what was reported to be the largest breach in U.S. history of credit card data, over 100 million records. I was asked to come in and help to fix that. My background had been as a serial entrepreneur, having been a CEO of 7 startups and then in venture capital. And the same things that I looked for there in terms of best of breed products, unique technology, the best and the brightest people were the characteristics that we looked for to help fix this problem with end-to-end encryption. There's a challenge with trying to use pure startup companies in that as a Fortune 1000 company, we have to know that the technology and the principles are going to be around for the long run. One of the things that we liked about Voltage was the fact that it was a venture-backed company. They had made it over the hump. They had been tried and tested, not in the payments industry, but in other applications. They had the capital, they had the right management team, and we looked at 50 different encryption companies, technology companies, and they were mostly Me Too products. And when it came down to it, Voltage and the technology that had been spun out at Stanford was the true best of breed. We paid more money than we probably would have had to for other things on the market, surprisingly, even though it's a new technology. But in hindsight, we're now 2 years into it practically, and we've been able to commercially launch it. Have over 3,000 merchants that are using it, that are protected, and it's getting good uptake in the market. So we were able to work with a startup very, very effectively.
Thank you. General Hayden, the Office of Strategic Services during and post World War II called upon the titans of American academia to Washington, D.C. to partner with the emerging intelligence community. In mid-1941, William Donovan recommended to President Roosevelt that in organizing the Foreign Intelligence Service, he should draw on the universities for experts. That core focus resulted in the essential composition of the OSS. General, as mentioned, the intelligence community has been partnering with academia for many years. Why is this program so successful, and how can we model this to develop a stronger and more viable cybersecurity research partnership between industry, government, and academia?
Thanks, Robert. I'm going to be a little bit negative here in a minute, but let me just say a few positive things about cooperation between the IC and academia. There's actually let me talk about, since it was my last job, analysis. The amount of dialogue between the analysts we had at CIA and academic specialists on different areas of the world was actually very rich and very profitable for both sides. So there is some core good news here in terms of continuing that OSS tradition of relying on, again, the resources in American society. It is more challenging for us today, however. We have become victim to broader cultural trends that have made it more difficult for the public sector and the private sector to cooperate. One example, as we talked in the interview earlier this afternoon, the Dana Priest, Bill Arkin article that made it a bit of a sin for the government to rely on private sector expertise for about anything, or at least the burden of proof has to be on the government when they're not using the government to do things that government needs to have done. So you've got that kind of cross current that makes it more difficult. There are also cross currents in academia that make this more challenging. Let me stick in the analytic lane for one or two more verses here and then go on to technology. Think of what American academia has done since 9/11 and compare it to the performance of American academia in, say, the 10 years from 1949 to 1959. If you take 9/11 as a seminal event that changes American security attitudes, you go back to the post-World War II era and you look at Paul Nitze and a document called NSC 67, which was, in essence, the foundation of deterrence and of the long competition with the Soviet Union that ultimately ended in success. Look at the retooling American academia did in the 10 years after Nitze and NSC 67 with regard to Russian language courses, Soviet studies, studies of Marxism, and so on, and compare it with the far smaller retooling of American academia after the 9/11 attacks. Yeah, I know. There are more Arabic language courses on American universities. But again, compare the scale to the retooling 49 to 59 and 2001 to 2011. And you'll see that for broader cultural reasons, the broader American culture is not as responsive to American security needs as it was a half century ago. Now let me drive the point home and be a bit unfair, and it's an exceptional example, but it's not an untrue one. Right? We have in Afghanistan something called human terrain teams. These are teams that we're very sensitive about. We don't attach them to the J2. We don't attach them to the intelligence organization of the regional brigade. They're kind of freestanding. They report to the commander. And these human terrain teams are designed for the commander to kind of, how to put it, to gain the kind of knowledge of their area of operations that you and I had for our neighborhoods growing up. You knew who was related to who, you know what street corner you could hang out on in the daylight, and you know which ones you could not hang out on after dark. You know the streets you could go down this time of day. I mean, you get it. I mean, just all those deep interpersonal relationships. They're a wonderful idea. We have turned to the American Anthropological Society to use their science and their discipline to help these human terrain teams. It has become a moral question of the first order for the American Anthropological Society as to whether or not they will participate, and on balance, they say no. That's the biggest difference between Bill Donovan going out to academia and saying, hey, I need a little help here, and Dave Petraeus or Stan McChrystal going out to the same or somewhat same academic community and saying, I need a little help here. So that's been a real challenge on what I'll call the liberal arts side of the equation. Frankly, I think we've been more successful on the technology side of the equation. I think government has been able to have a richer dialogue. It's been able to toss more problems into your inboxes, I think, than we've been able to do on the softer science side, and we've benefited from it. And I'll stop there.
Melissa, same question.
Well, I think that we have established how do we incentivize or get the venture capital mindset into the U.S. government and create almost a safe cutout. And with the establishment of In-Q-Tel in the 1990s, that's how the intelligence community would feed requirements into a venture capital group with venture capital from the government to look for the innovation in the small businesses or communities and say, well, that's an interesting idea, but here's how you might want to tailor it to a customer that I might have. And it's a unique way that at least the intelligence community has used a neutral third party to do the hunting and gathering of interesting technologies. So I agree with General Hayden that that's something that the community has done a very good job at. The Department of Defense has a similar concept that they launched in the less than a decade ago called Da Vinci. that I think is not experiencing as much success as the In-Q-Tel model has, and I couldn't necessarily diagnose that. As you look at what the OSS had as a unique focus area, the period of 49 to 59 was a very unique era of where we're faced on looking at just a bipolar world and one particular area of really space and aerospace areas. And I think now there's so many different priorities, it's hard to keep a focus on. But what I think would be interesting is if we looked beyond just the United States and we looked at how do we start to align research agendas with common problems with our European and other allies. If you take the example I used earlier, the United States government is spending over $5 billion a year, or close to $5 billion a year on information technology and research areas, and that shortfalls. The European Union is also spending another 1.4 billion euro. And as they're looking at proposals, the proposals have to be responsive to multinational priorities, and they have to have multinational or multiple companies involved in the solution. If we look at that collectively, we all have the similar problems in cyberspace and on our core infrastructures. So what if we were to start to look at unique alliances with our multinational corporations, with our respective government dollars, towards creating a new type of partnership and view that the OSS had in a bipolar world.
Thank you. To Steve, cybersecurity is fast becoming Washington, D.C.'s growth industry of choice. Appears to be in line for a multi-billion-dollar injection of federal research dollars, according to a senior intelligence official. Don Myrick, Deputy Director of National Intelligence for Acquisition and Technology, said that along with the White House Office's Science and Technology, her office is going to sponsor major research where the government's about to spend multiple billions of dollars. This newest element of the Federal Cybersecurity Initiative will not be looking for what Myrick's called classic Beltway commercial answers to be applied to today's hacker problems at federal agencies. She stated we need to be really innovative or we will run out of runway on our current approach. The question to you, Steve, is new technologies in the industry can be implemented quickly. The counterbalance is the agility of where the government has oversight. So you have agility and then they have oversight, needs, requirements, common criteria, et cetera, that inherently slow down the process to integrate. So why does industry move quicker, and what lessons can the government learn from being more innovative while balancing a risk-adverse culture?
Well, Robert, I think what we've learned is that we have to be proactive rather than reactive, and we really have to think the adversary. In our case, as an example, we're dealing with the 21st century bank robbers. These are not 14-year-old hackers. These are organized criminal gangs that are out there to wreak havoc in our financial institutions. And ultimately, the government's fighting the same people, whether they're going after military secrets, they're going after the grid, the financial infrastructure. And I think that's where operating at internet speed that the government needs to understand, and really putting together the public-private partnership concept. It can work. We found after our breach that unfortunately there were people in the government and in industry that had knowledge of the specific malware that hit us, and had that information been able to be shared and moved at a much faster pace, we could have avoided $130 million cost and a major $700 million hit to our stock price. So I think it's really fundamentally operating at internet speed, and we've got to outthink the bad guys.
Thank you. General Hayden, the Manhattan Project was a code name for a public-private partnership initiative during World War II to develop the first atomic bomb. It started as a small research project that was led by the U.S. and included participation from the United Kingdom and Canada. The project included participation in over 30 locations from universities, national labs, industrial plants, and was funded by the federal government. General, why is this type of initiative needed, or is this type